All right, take a look at Brutus #1 here and the intro to this, and we're going to read and we're going to highlight and we're going to make annotations on this too. It'll feel a lot like English class, only better. All right. The Anti-Federalists expressed concerns over the fears of a strong national government. Okay. And they countered the Federalist Papers with a series of their own articles. In this essay, Brutus, whose true identity remains unknown, argues that if states adopted the Constitution, the national government would slowly dominate the states and drown out their powers. The writer also contended that small republics would be better to help liberty than a large republic. Now, something that you want to be cognizant of, remember, anti-federalists, their big concern was always going to be that the national government would be too strong, too authoritative. And an unknown author who would always sign his name Brutus, because, Roman times, they loved it. And Brutus felt like he was saving Rome from whom? Julius Caesar. And what had Julius Caesar done? What is it? He took control of the empire. He was a tyrant, okay? And Brutus felt like he was saving us from tyranny, all right? And so ultimately, he's answering the Federalist Papers with an essay of his own. So there's a couple things we want to look at. The opening of his argument presents a form of democracy or commitment to democracy. And he says, the Convention of the States has been assembled. They formed a constitution which shall be submitted to the people to ratify or reject. And he says, the people who are the fountain of all power. Okay? Let's highlight that for a second here because there are things we want to note. If you don't know, the highlight button is up here, 1, 2, 3rd from the right. Okay? All you have to do is highlight and hit highlighter. All right? Now, the cool thing also is that if you look just to the left of the highlight button, you can add a sticky note. All right? And if we add a sticky note right here, this is relevant because the fact that the people are the fountain of all power, that essentially all power rests with them, who is Brutus referencing there that said that the people are ultimately in charge? What is it? What person do we base a lot of our governmental ideas off of? Thank you, John Locke. They're like, oh, this is a reference to John Locke. So we're going to add this in here as a note that consent of the people and the idea of popular sovereignty. All right. Ultimately, the people are the deciders in any form of government. And notice he says, look, to whom alone it belongs the right to make or unmake constitutions or other forms of government at their pleasure. All right. The people hold authority here. All right. Now, beyond that, he goes into an interesting little diatribe here. And the first question that presents itself is whether a confederated government be the best for the United States or not. All right. What's he referencing here saying if we should question whether a confederated government be the best for the United States? What type of government or what government document was he referring to? Oh, baller right here refers to the Articles, should probably not make that capital, Articles of Confederation, and whether or not we should keep it. And what do you think Brutus was going to say? Should we keep the Articles of Confederation or should we adopt the new Constitution? Well, if he's an anti-federalist, what's he going to say? Keep the Articles of Confederation. And his mindset is we should keep it. All right? We should keep what we have. Okay? And it says, in other words, should we reduce the 13 United States to one great republic or whether they should continue to be 13 confederated republics with only a couple purposes that they work together with? All right. Now, he's going to make a few complaints about the new Constitution. Okay. He says, hey, we're terrified of this strong national government that you put together under the Constitution. And he goes, This government is to possess absolute and uncontrollable power, legislative, executive, and judicial, with every respect to extends the last clause of Section 8, Article the 1st. And he goes, in that article, in that little section and article, it says it's declared that Congress shall have the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. What part of the Constitution is he griping about here? The necessary and proper clause or the elastic clause. We'll put another sticky note here. Griping about the elastic clause. Okay? And he says, look, that's going to give it absolute and uncontrollable power. Gives the national, should spell that one right too. Uncontrollable power. Absolute power. I feel like it's very much like Darth Sidious in Star Wars, or Sauron in Lord of the Rings. All right, so he's complaining. He goes, hey, they got in that Constitution the necessary and proper clause. He's not done complaining, though, because much like you all, he's a whiner. All right, he says, and by the 6th article, it's declared that this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance of, and the treaties which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. What part of the Constitution is he griping about here? I heard somebody say it. What's he complaining about? Article 6, what's the key clause there? Which says that the Constitution and any laws made under it are the supreme law of the land. The supremacy clause, okay? Upset about the supremacy clause. Because if there's a dispute or something wrong between the national government and the state government, they've got conflicting laws, whose is going to win? That's not a trick question. National government, man, okay? Again, gives national government too much authority. Or as Cartman would say, authority. Right? He's not done complaining. Okay? Because, you know, there's some things worth complaining about. And you're going to see as this goes on, you know, Brutus actually makes some sense here. It says, Congress, it has the authority to make laws which will affect the lives, liberties, and property of every man in the United States. Congress is competent to lay taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, and there's no limitation on this power. Okay? This is referring to tax and spend. Tax and spend power has no limitation. And I'm going to put in here in all caps, yikes. The federal government can tax you about virtually anything. Oh my goodness. Right? And look, man, this is going to get even wonkier. Something else I want to add here too, from his text, Brutus also addressed among the people that it's proper to remark here that the authority to lay and collect taxes is the most important of any power that can be granted. Okay? Now, here's where things get crazy. Okay? He's going to mention some things here, and he says, number one, states can't emit paper money. Meaning that, remember, who's the only person or the only entity that can create money under the Constitution? Where does all your money come from? Is it from the state of West Virginia? It's from whom? National government, the United States of America. All right. So look, states don't get to emit paper money, and they also can't lay any duties, imposts on imports or exports, but by consent of Congress. Meaning that, hey, states can't tax imports and exports. Only the national government can do that, which means the national government has a way to make money that the states don't. All right? Now, here's where things get tricky. He says the only mean, therefore, left for any state and its government to discharge its debts is by direct taxation. All right? And that's a big deal. Okay? He says states are limited because what's the only way they can do that is by taxing. And by the way, what do you think direct taxation means? Who are they directly taxing? Yeah. What about the states? Who can they tax? What? The people themselves, okay? States and their only option for generating money or monies, which is a real word if I spell it right, is to directly tax its citizens. Right? And he goes, that's the only means we have of making money. The government can always tax imported goods. Sure. Right? He says states and their only way to generate revenue is by directly taxing the people. And he says, look, guess who else has this power? The United States can lay and collect taxes in any way they please. And it says when the federal government begins to exercise the right of taxation to raise monies, the states will find it impossible to support their government. Right? Why not? Because people will get annoyed with the state for taxing them. They're like, we're getting double taxed. The state and the national government are doing that. Now, here's one of the chief complaints. Without money, they cannot be supported and they'll dwindle away, and the powers will be absorbed by the general government, meaning the national government. All right? And so he's saying, look, without money of their own, states become powerless. Now, here's the trick with this too. If a state doesn't have the ability to generate much money, who do they have to rely on for money? Not the people, because remember, which government? The national government. They would have to rely on the national government for help, right? And that helps make the national government more powerful. Fun fact here. Let's see here. Hey, Briley, what's the drinking age in the United States? Like, how old do you have to be to drink alcohol? 21, right? Wait a second. Is there anything in the Constitution about alcohol or the drinking age? No. All right. And fun fact, that means who should be making the law about drinking ages? States. Guess what? They do. All right. But the federal government, here's how tricky they are. And here's where Brutus would be really annoyed with this. The drinking age in every single state is 21. How did the federal government get everybody to do this? What's a good incentive? What is it? Money. Okay. I think it was in 1984. The federal government told every state you have to make your drinking age 21. And if you do this, we're going to give you money for funding your highways, for paving your highways. And if you don't do this, what are we not going to give you? No money. All right. Now, states are like, hey, we already don't have a lot of money on our own, which means they basically have to do what? They got to agree with the federal government. They have to change their drinking age. And so there it's been. Before this, some states had their drinking age at 19 or 20. And you're like, oh my gosh, I want to go there. All right. But the federal government's like, no. Is that kind of a jerk move? A little bit. Okay. But the states are like, hey, you don't have to change that. Some education policies, here's an example. President Obama, a couple of years ago, at the end of his administration, told schools, if you do not have a policy which allows transgender students to use the restroom of their choice, guess what we're going to take away? Some of your education funding. All right. And that made people super nervous. By the way, Trump reversed that because that's right now, that's at the president's discretion. Trump reversed that and he said, we're not going to hold schools accountable for that. But what you do is you dangle money in front of the states, and states are desperate for that. Here's an example. West Virginia, anybody driven on a road that absolutely sucks? Aowen, where's a road near you that you hate driving on? 7 Mile. I don't know where that is, but it sounds awful. All right. Anybody ever go up Johns Creek? That road is awful in some places. Thankfully, they have paved some of it in the last year, but it is absolutely dreadful. Where's a road near you, Maggie, that it sucks really bad? Yates Crossing. Basically, pick a lot of different spots in Cabell County. Now, imagine this. What if West Virginia said we're going to change our drinking age to 18? Right? We're going to lose that federal highway funding. We're already struggling to keep up roads. So realistically, do we have an option at all? No, we don't. All right. Brutus does have a good point here, okay? And if he were around today, he'd look like that's crazy. Fun fact too, anybody want to know how much money that the federal government gives out to states every year in grants? If you just had to guess, throw out a figure. 5 million? Higher. Higher. You're not adding enough zeros. You're not adding enough zeros. Billions. Hundreds of billions of dollars are given out in grants to states every year. Okay? And one of the ways in which you get the money is you got to take the strings. Here's another example, too. What do you not have to pay for here at school? Food. Breakfast and lunch are free for everybody, regardless of income. Okay? But if you take that money from the federal government, what does that mean? Well, it has to be, obviously, it's going to be taken from something else. But if you take the money from them, what do you have to agree to get the money? Something that they want done. For example, I don't know how they swung it, but every meal, your breakfast and lunch from the school, they have to have there's certain calorie guidelines, and also what's an ingredient that has to be in all different stuff. Not dairy. Good guess though. But you have to have at least one dairy, one fruit and vegetable. You have to have meat, something on your tray. And you notice how the cooks always have told you in the past you have to take this, and then what do you end up doing with it anyway? Throwing away because you didn't want to eat it. But the federal government says if you take our money, here are the rules that come along with that. Another fun fact too: what are in your Pop Tarts and all your cereals now? What is it? Whole grain, and they don't have the regular amount of sugar in them. They're reduced sugar. Although I can't lie, the Cinnamon Toast Crunch, even with reduced sugar, is still good. All right. The federal government, are they invading in a policy area that shouldn't really be theirs? Probably so. Okay. And ultimately, though, why will Cabell County schools take the money anyway? What is it? Because we need it. All right. To a large degree, the federal government's always helped people who have like fell below a certain income level, and they're like, hey, if the federal government's willing to pay for every kid to eat, we can take a burden off of regular folks. Okay, let's take a look at this. And Brutus says, look, the size of the nation is going to be a problem, and he says the size of a nation, a free republic cannot stand in a country of such immense extent containing such a number of inhabitants. And so he's saying, look, the size is a problem geographically and with population, and here's why. Okay, first of all, he's going to name drop. According to Montesquieu, all right, and remember, that's the guy that came up with the three branches idea, separating power into legislative, executive, and judicial. It's natural for a republic to have a small territory, otherwise it can't subsist, meaning it won't last. In a small one, the interests of public are easier perceived, better understood, and more within the reach of every citizen. In a small republic, why is it easier for the interests of the public to be perceived? Why is it easier, say, for West Virginia to understand its own people than to understand everybody of a country? We have similar views. You have less diverse interests, okay? And we're going to put another little sticky note here, too. Small republic, easier to understand your people, or another word for that, your constituents. Okay? It's easier to understand what people want in a small area because there's less diverse opinions. It's easier to get West Virginians to agree on certain policies as opposed to West Virginians, Californians, Iowans, etc. Okay? Much easier to understand that. Also, it says they're more within the reach of everyone. Okay? Meaning that it's also easier to connect to all the people and the lawmakers of a given area. Okay, so Montesquieu was like, he's name dropping. Everybody would have read Montesquieu, and he goes, Montesquieu says it's easier in a small republic to understand everybody. Okay, true. Now the next one, history furnishes no example of a free republic, anything like the extent of the United States. The Grecian republics, meaning those are the republics from Greece, like the city-states, Athens, Sparta, etc., was of small extent, and so was that of the Romans. Both of these, it is true, in the process of time, extended their conquest over large territories, and the consequences was that their governments were changed from the free governments to those of the most tyrannical that ever existed. Okay? And so he says, look, the consequence of making your republic large, the consequence of making this republic large means what's more likely to happen? You're subject to tyranny. Large republics are subject to tyranny. I think I just spelled tyranny wrong. All right? History demonstrates this. So says our man Brutus. Right? And he's got a point, because once again, we talked about he calls himself Brutus because Julius Caesar was a tyrant. Right? He's an oppressive ruler. In a republic, the manners, sentiments, and interests of people should be similar. If this is not the case, there will be a constant clashing of opinions, and the representatives of one part will be continually striving against those of another. Look, that's really important too, because is that happening in the country today? Yes. America's so large and there's so many diverse interests and types of people that essentially it makes it hard to govern. All right? Manners and habits such as climates and productions. Manners and habits differ such as climates and productions. And their sentiments are by no means coincidence. The laws and customs of several states are in many respects very diverse and some in opposite. Each would favor its own interests and customs. Okay? And ultimately it's saying is this, it's hard to agree on certain laws and different policies because everybody's going to favor what suits or benefits them the most. West Virginia senators are going to vote for the stuff that helps West Virginia. Like, for example, would we vote, like our people in Congress vote for policies that help out coal mining? Yes. But are there some states who were like, there's no way they would vote for that? Because coal mining isn't important to them. And not only that, they're like, they don't benefit from it. They see that it hurts the land. All right, last couple paragraphs here. In a republic of such vast extent, the legislature cannot attend to the various concerns and wants of its different parts. The legislature can't be sufficiently numerous to be acquainted with the local conditions and the wants of different districts that would continually be arising. Okay? Why can't the lawmaking body become too familiar with the problems of the country? Why can't Congress, for example, right now, what's one of the biggest problems, or what one of the biggest problems is simply that there are 330 million people in 50 different states which have different geographies, different backgrounds, and ways of living. What is it impossible for members of Congress to know about? What is it? And how many different small things are there? A lot. Do you think members of Congress understand the problems you deal with? Probably not unless they've gone through them. Members of Congress cannot possibly understand the needs and wants of everyone because we are so varied. There are more people than we can understand. All right? There's so many different diverse interests. It's like, look, even if you get somebody like a Landon Paul, who he says, I'm a people person, I get to know folks, and he spends time talking to people from all around the country, still, you can't possibly be an expert on all the issues that affect all 330 million people. It's just not feasible, right? You're good, but you're not that good. All right, last paragraph here, okay? It says there are some reasons by which it appears that a free republic cannot subsist over a country of those great extent of these states. If then this new constitution is calculated to consolidate the 13 states into one, as it evidently is, it ought not be adopted. Okay, he says, look, we're better off with small republics. All right, these small republics are more able to figure out what the people in their area want, and you have a more concentrated set of interests, right? And it's easier to deal with by region than it is otherwise. And he says, hey, not only that, but remember, he said states don't have enough power to stop the national government because the only way in which we can raise money is direct taxation. And we can't really do that because the federal government's going to directly tax you too. And then what will happen is we'll have to rely on the federal government for monies. And it turns out maybe he's got a good point here. All right. Now, for you fine people, one of the things you want to do is make sure that you save this so that your annotations and whatnot and notes get saved on this particular document. Okay. Brutus number 1, small republics, states don't have the ability to raise money on their own, and there's too many diverse interests. Questions, comments on Brutus number 1? All right. Here's what you're going to do. You can click the little disk button, but the best thing to do would be to go to File and then Save As. And then you want to save it, like pick where you want to save it. Like I want to save it on my desktop. So I double click that. It just made a terrible noise in my head. Okay. And I want to save it as Brutus number 1. And I'm going to save it to my desktop. And it says it already exists. Do you want to replace it? And me personally, I'm not going to because I don't want all my annotations saved. But you would want to do that. Everybody got it? All right, hang on and I'll help you.